I was in the S&S mess with Richard Dunkley, Mick Foot, we were drinking, just basically saying, this is it. Yeah, we'll be all right.
Everybody piled out of the mess, and at the top of the mess hatch, the guys that were going forward, Coxey, etc., they turned left and went forward. Myself and everybody for aft went down the main drag.
There was myself, Mick Foot and Bob Sage, and it was our job basically to get the scran on the counter for the lads. Obviously during action stations it was mainly a big pot mess.
It was such a clean ship. You only had to walk down the passageways and it was just shiny, shiny. The spirit, I think, was always there and had evolved from the very first ship's company that were on board.
We were short-staffed on 21s, so you had to scrub. Everyone had to scrub, even the POs and chiefs had to scrub. And that's what I liked about it. Everyone scrubbed. And then everyone went ashore together.
You know, he would go out, drink his fill all night, come back in the early hours of the morning, get up, start again, but be professional in his job. Very professional guy.
One of the wonderful things about Knocker was that he was always happy, always jolly. He was a damn good killick stoker, and there was an awful lot more that he could do.
If something was going on, if Knocker wasn't involved, he wasn't far behind. But you couldn't get angry with him because he'd got the smile on him that would just basically make everything all right again.
A irreverent little sod at times, but he's just so joyous and just so epitomised what we were all about. Even in some of the darkest times, he was full of life and smiling and as I say, irreverent. Yeah, but he wasn't the only one. There were lots of people like that.
He loved camping, and we often used to go out up Weardale, and he was never happier except when he was turning a stone over and looking at what was underneath it, and then the stone would go back ever so gently so he wouldn't crush anything below it. It was the same down on the beach, and he was always happy and bubbly and bouncy. Not a great scholar. Never really showed any inclination into engineering. Never really played football. He was invited to go to Swan House in Newcastle for an interview prior to joining the Merchant Navy. And then he also applied for the Royal Navy, of which he passed to go in there. And then the decision came as, what does he do, Merchant or Royal? Anyway, he picked the Royal Navy.
Steve was a very, very kind, generous person, loyal, and he always had a smile, and he was always on the go. Every time he was just on the go, you know. I mean, the loyalty bit was when there was one of the lads he went to school with didn't go home for whatever reason, we don't know, and Steve wouldn't leave him, so they actually hid in a bush And the police actually found them and brought Steve home to Mum. And he said to Mum, he says, I couldn't let him sleep out on his own. He was just natural. Nothing was a bother, you know. He was very family orientated, loved being around with the family. I mean, we all used to sit at the table on a night time and talk about what's happened through the day and stuff like that. And another thing, you always knew when Steve was home, because in the toilet, there was always the dandy, the beano. That was his thing. He just loved the comics.
He was the instigator of us taking on the whistling, always look on the bright side of life, as we went into the very busy, difficult work-up period in Frost. And whenever we got a baddish report, out of the earshot of the Frost staff would say, always look on the bright side, and whistle away, and that came on. It spread through the ship very quickly, this happiness about a difficult situation. So he was the only junior rate, as I joined a ship, had said to me, we like it on air, Chief. We like it here, so you better fit in with the team, is what he said.
It's a very honest statement,
Yeah,
isn't
yeah,
it?
yeah.
How did you feel about
I thought, well, God, I was amazing. Well, I must be doing all right, because I'm in a ship that wants to do the job. We're top notch on the levels, the standards that were present at the time. We'd got to come away from Portland with the good.
Yeah, we'd previously been at Portland.
We had,
Not
and
long before.
we'd done really well.
We travelled to Newcastle in the Reliant Robin and met Buck on the platform at Newcastle and had a minute or two, and the train pulled in, and I sort of patted both of them on the backs and said, look after each other, of which I could bite my tongue off for saying that, you know, when I look back, it wasn't intended to be anything other than just, you know, be mates sort of thing. And off they went. And you stood on the station and waved till they pulled out, because Newcastle, you can see it for quite a while. You just don't think when you wave somebody off like that, that's the last you're going to see of them. It was just incredible when I look back now, but
So why do you think the ship and the ship's company wanted to do the job? But what was it about the Ardent?
Now that is a really difficult. What makes a bunch of blokes gel together? Is it good leadership? I think must come to it an awful lot. Understanding, tolerance, these sorts of things, and sharing the same sense of humour, I think, was most important. You know, nothing was too difficult.
I think the ship was extremely proud of itself. The crew were extremely proud of themselves. We were well worked up. You know, I thought that professionally we were very, very good. It was a great atmosphere, and everyone seemed to get on really, really well.
And there was a lot of banter, and you can help get you used to join in. I mean, it was the thing to do. But it wasn't just that mess. It was the Seamen's mess, the S&S mess, all together. They used to go ashore together, and they used to fight together, basically. we all realised we were going, and you had to think, right, we're on our way, we got to get on with it. And so we'd close up at action stations now and again, and everyone would be there. They'd work their bollocks off to get everything done. Then, of course, that's how it just stayed like that. It's just a simple level of hard work, because there's nowhere good. We weren't stopping anywhere. We were going down to the action. So, yeah, everyone got on well.
The first thing we heard about Belgrano was the actual sinking, and the immediate reaction was elation, quickly followed by having been reminded by the boss, Terry Pendergrass, that they were sailors like us, was then a deep sorrow that they'd lost so many people and they were just guys like us doing the job. So yes, it was a sobering moment to listen to that, and it was also the moment for me personally where I realised we were going to a shooting war.
All the way down, the peace talks were going on. I thought this will blow over. You know, even when we started making our own dog tags, so there wasn't a great concern about it until actually the Sheffield got hit.
And we heard the news with great sadness.
That really hit home. I mean, how the hell did she get sunk so quick? And you think, Christ, now we're going to go into a situation we've never been before.
Me personally, I was thinking about how am I going to cope? I'm going to be the leader here, and might well be put in a position where I'm going to have to, say, step over an injured shipmate to do something in order to get the ship back. So I reconciled with myself that I could do that. Mm-hmm. You wrestle with yourself, don't you? In the quiet moments, I'm going to do this. It's just the same as being on watch in the ship's control centre, and you're thinking all the time, what happens if that breaks down? What happens if that breaks down? What am I going to do? You're preparing yourself for all these eventualities, and that's what I was doing, because generally that's what your training is.
When we sailed finally from Ascension in a company with, we were escorting Canberra, and out on the horizon the Elk, because she was topped up to the gunnels with ammunition. I felt quite privileged that we were chosen to escort the troop ship, as it were. The captain said, we're going to give a gunfire demonstration to the troops on Canberra. And we took up station alongside her. Everybody obviously was cleared off the upper deck while the gunfire was demonstrated. And then they said, right, people can now go on the upper deck and wave if you want to, chaps. So I went onto the flight deck, and I'm right at the back of the flight deck in the video with with the white overalls on. And then we all cleared the upper deck again, because we were going to go and give a demonstration of our speed capability. Eventually changed to Olympus engines, 90 lever, and off we went in our inimitable fashion, like a proper greyhound of the seas.
I think you mentioned you were called Doomwatch.
Doomwatch, yes.
Why Doomwatch?
Well, we had that sort of Matlow sense of humour, whereas, you know, can I have your right steaming boot if you lose your leg? And, you know, can you leave me your stash of porn, you know, if anything happens? And we were, how am I going to climb the after engine room ladder with only 1 foot? It's that banter that's caused from probably insecurity, a little bit of fear. Nobody wanted to show any fear or insecurity. So it was great. It was a great attitude.
I can't really speak for the young lads. I won't say that they were sort of excited at the prospect of war. I don't think they were. I just get the feeling that they were, we've got a job to do, let's get on with it.
So this is an interesting question for me because as the ship's bombardment control officer on the day of the landings, I had known for a couple of weeks what our job was going to be that day, and was very much situationally aware.
I think obviously secrecy and information contained within those that need to know. I don't remember, other than piped briefs, I had no idea what we were actually doing or where we were going. So it was, no, it's just the information that came over the tannoy.
Did you ever give it any thought why the Ardent was going to be on the gun line on the day of the landings, or why not one of the other 21s? Had you given that any thought at all?
I would assume it would be because of our workup state and our recent history and our record of firings, and that we were probably the best selected. I wouldn't know any other reason.
You're right, naval gunfire support was something the Ardent was really good at, and it probably played a big part in why we were selected for that mission.
So we knew that, and we knew that what we were going to do was to go right down into the middle of Falkland Sound, into a small, not an inlet, but a small stretch of water called Grantham Sound, with the object of awaiting a call to fire so that we could then throw some bricks, as we called it, into Goose Green to keep the Pucara aircraft that were known to be there on the ground and not be a threat, because they were the only things that were a threat to the task force landing in St. Connors Water.
As chefs, I don't suppose we knew a lot. We knew we was going in, but we didn't know, we didn't know exactly what was going to happen until the bombardment started. Our role, was, like I said, was basically getting scran on the counter, and that was more important to us than feeding the lads.
We knew we were vulnerable because the chatter gets around the ship, but we were still concerned, and having spoken to some of the gunnery senior rates, they said, well, we can't operate the gun in automatic because we've got all this radar problem around with it being so close to land and with the hills of the Falklands, both West and East Falkland, in the way. We won't know too very soon if we are going to receive an air attack, and when it comes, we won't be able to see them until we visually see them. So that was a bit concerning.
They were good kids. They worked hard. They on watch. They'd be all right. Everyone was ready for action, but then we didn't realise how bad we were going to get hit, and that's the thing.
So it's May the 21st, and we're now at action stations. Was anyone truly ready, do you think, in the team around yourself or your observations?
I think professionally, everybody was ready. Everybody, knew what they had to do, knew what was expected of them. Nobody could have actually been ready for what was going to happen because it was, that's the complete unknown. So, and that's the test of your character or whatever happens when things do go wrong. But I think we were already professionally proud of the ship, proud of each other. But I don't think we were ready for what actually happened. We didn't understand, I certainly didn't understand, the devastation that can be caused by modern weaponry, and how ineffective, you know, some training can be in dealing with that.
We honestly thought, you know, with the fire damage control and fire parties, we'd, you know, they'd be in the thick of it. But well, they certainly were.
It'd be the upper deck crews. It'd be the canteen manager. He was manning a gun, or weapon, I should say.
Well, I know John Leake, he took it on himself to basically do that post because he was ex-army anyway, and his expertise, if you like, was GPMG, and Cliff decided to be his loader. How that came about, I'm not 100% sure, but I know to do a role like that when planes are coming over must have taken some guts to do.
And the seamen, all the seamen on the upper deck, lookouts, because we didn't have posh radar like they got nowadays. So yeah, they would have been right in the thick of it. I mean, dangerously.
And it sort of made me think occasionally of my first time at sea when I joined the Navy. So I knew what was going through their minds, added into the fact that as part of their first experience at sea, they were actually going to war. So I couldn't really imagine how they were feeling, you know, especially being so young.
Action stations closed at 11. At midnight, we went through the gap. Now I thought, something's close. And as we went through, you could hear all the stones and that hitting the bottom of the ship. I mean, it was loud, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Really, really loud. I'm thinking, God, not much water there.
We got to into Grantham Sound and, you know, relaxed a bit. We were still at action stations, but in a relaxed state. We weren't expecting to get any opposition just yet. We knew that they would start flying out from the mainland as and when.
Of course, we got in, and that's when they stood us down for a bit to get some sleep, basically. But you couldn't sleep anyway. But I went back into the mess and lay down on the bunk, got in my sleeping bag to get warm. Because you're absolutely freezing. That's what I always remember. It was cold.
I had half of them in the senior rates side of the dining hall, sleeping, and the other half were in the junior rate side. We sent out patrols, making sure everything is still working. We still have to do watchkeeping on the machinery that's running in our areas, did that. A lot of the guys were playing uckers.
The previous 3 nights, while we'd been transiting through the total exclusion zone, the TES, it had been really murky, low ceiling for cloud, all the rest of it, and we thought, great, no aircraft can get through all this lot. So dawn broke, and I went on the upper deck, and there was not a cloud in the sky, and I thought, oh shit. I thought they're gonna come and get us, you know. And then we heard over the main broadcast that lorries had been seen on the skyline, and there was the crump of the 4-5 as they engaged what turned out to be cows. So that was quite funny. And we were getting a running commentary about the gunfire spotter who was had to clear up what we understand what was going on Fanning Head, would then have to make his way down to overlook Goose Green so that he could liaise with Captain Bob, Royal Artillery liaison officer, for the accurate positioning of the gunfire support.
It must have been nearly dinner time, I suppose. The skipper said area wide and red. Pucara inbound. Oh no, it's all right. He's been splashed. Where Harrier jet came in, just stopped, turned, bang, he'd gone. I'm looking around. I thought, thank God for that. That would have come in here. Wake up call. And that was, yeah, just before. Well, no, just before they brought some rock buns round and a cup of tea. They were nice. I hadn't had nothing to eat all day.
It's difficult in that situation where you're in that. They haven't got time to keep us informed about what's going on, apart from what's pertinent to us.
And the air raid warning red came in, and your brace position was basically face down on the floor, your eyes covered by an arm underneath you and one hand wrapped over the top of your head. But vaguely remember the sound of an aircraft and tensing, but then nothing happened, and it seemed a bit of an anticlimax. And I remember looking at Jan Joyce, and he looked at me, and it was sort of like.
We'd all heard that the Argentinians couldn't refuel in flight, and therefore they couldn't take it. If they'd left late from Argentina, they couldn't come over to the Falklands. So we were all looking forward to that time when they couldn't fly. Some of the bizarre things that had happened during the day, like re-ammunitioning the 4.5 gun, asking to be taken.
That was the move of the ammunition from the flight area where we'd used spare storage for weapons we didn't have to carry extra ammunition for the main gun.
Yeah.
So that was quite a unique event because it meant opening up the ship completely down the main drag and moving some fairly big pieces of ammunition.
I thought it was really bizarre carrying a shell, 4 or 5 shells, through the main drag and air raid warnings coming in. I thought,
Well, as part of the team that was discharging those cartridges and rounds towards the enemy, I thank you for moving those.
Before we even fired the gun, it may have been before or been after the farce with the cows. One of my sort of rowing bits and pieces, I went up to the ops room and saw my mate Tansy Lee, who was, his action station was up there, and sort of asked him what happens once we're finished with actually keeping the Pucara on the deck. I said, what are we, or do you know what we're going to do now? And he intimated to me and showed me on the chart. He said, we are ordered to go up to the north of Falkland Sound and act as a picket. So I thought, thank God for that, we'll get out of it, because we're in open water there, and in open water the gun can take to bear, and the guiding missile, for what it's worth, can come to bear, etc. So felt fairly relieved at that. And then after we'd successfully done our role in gunfire supporting in Goose Green, the captain came on and said we've now been ordered to split the air attacks in the middle of Falkland Sound. I thought, you bastards.
Argonaut was heading towards the opening for San Carlos, She'd been put there obviously to split up the attacks. And one aircraft, I don't recall seeing any other aircraft, but this one aircraft was diving down towards the ship, and I actually saw 2 missiles, bombs or whatever, leave the aircraft, and didn't see any effect of explosions or anything like that. So I thought, cool, they got away with that one.
Do you remember a coin toss with Knocker about changing positions, doing things?
Absolutely. It's one of the things that I, post that period, I've always relied on a coin toss, but it happened well before we got to the Falklands, because, it obviously wouldn't have changed round on the day of the action. Nobody wanted to be a Fearnought seaman. It was a pretty awful job, hot, sweaty, long periods of sitting around. We decided that we'd toss a coin for it. I'm outside the NAFI. When that was, I'm sure it was Ascension time, somewhere around there, before we got down south. Fortunately for myself, obviously I won the toss, and I did pumping and flooding, and Knocker did the Fearnought Superman.
And that changed the fate of the day for both of you?
Absolutely, yeah.
And we were aware, or I was aware, that night was sort of on the way, or darkness was starting to come in, and that's potentially going to be the hardest day done, because then people will be ashore, anti-aircraft stuff will be set up ashore to help cover us, etc., etc. It was just, if we could make it to that first night, then that'd be the job done, I think.
What were you thinking then?
What was I thinking?
Yeah.
That's really interesting. So I had been doing the bombardment control officer role in the ops room, and we'd finished that mission, and it was then that we were being sent to take up station in kind of the main route through into St. Carlos. And that's when the first air raids came in. I know what's going on, and it's something I've discussed with other people. That was the difference between my job and say your job. I kind of knew what was going on, or not what was going on, but I wasn't down below with no kind of general ideas.
Cliff always said from the beginning, which was pretty obvious, that we had to do it to keep the 2 watches completely separate. It was myself, Mick Foot and Bob Sage in one. And Dunks, Dave Trotter and Mick Beckett in the other. And basically we should never meet. As the time went on, we were supposed to go and relieve the cooks down aft. And we was on the way there when Paddy McGuinness, who was in charge of the forward section base, said, "You're not going anywhere. There's an air raid warning on. You will stay put." Paddy turned his back. Bigfoot decided he was going to go aft to relieve the on-watch party.
There must have been, well, it was the full outfit of people down there, so 25, 30.
The strident tones of the officer of the watch saying take cover, took on a different tone and became, I wouldn't say panicky, wrong word, but strident. And I was petrified, absolutely petrified.
So I knew that there was aircraft coming at us. I heard Jono calling that he'd got the targets and switched to emergency control. And we still don't know why, but the Seacat launcher didn't go to emergency control. So Jono on the target acquisition system was tracking them, but we just couldn't get the launcher
link
to
to the-
follow.
yeah.
And I was screaming switch to emergency control.
Yeah.
And I just knew at that point that we didn't get into emergency control. And the next thing I know is
Horrendous sounds. Oh, dreadful, dreadful sounds of tearing metal.
And then there was an almighty bang, but not as an explosion as you would see that you think of in the movies, sort of like of a metallic sound. And I was physically lifted about 18 inches off the deck vertically.
It was a big hit, almost, well, it was directly above me. And then water started coming through the junior rates dining hall shutter, which I thought, well, you know, why would that come through? Well, why would it come through? How is it coming through there? And that's when I was dispatched up top to go and have a look and see what was going on.
Yeah, it was coming down on us.
Yeah.
So I got up thinking, oh, what am I going to do now? And I shouted, go. And luckily, everybody went. Because we knew you don't know what's happened, and I needed to get information back to HQ1 quickly, and I shouted, go. They opened the doors of the lockers and they started putting stuff out. There were props and splinter boxes to take it around.
So again, as part of the mobile repair party, out of the engineer's workshop, turned aft, and as you go out aft, there's the ladder up to the starboard waist and towards the hangar, and I heard a shout from somebody saying, help me. I don't know who it was, but I just automatically reacted and went up the ladder towards it. At the top of the ladder, somebody thrust a hose pipe into my hand. And
I very quickly realised that that wasn't the problem. And then I stopped Knocker, who stood there with a big splinter box and a prop over his shoulder, ready to go. I said, no, put that down, go out and find out what's wrong.
I went through the access door into the hangar, and there was basically greeted by a sight of utter carnage. Just debris everywhere, a gaping hole with the hangar roof been ripped open like a sardine can, and fires all around. And so basically I just dived in as best I could and then just started fighting the fires.
I came out on through the sort of the NBC cleaning station and the first door into the hangar door. And as I opened the hangar door, there was obviously, you know, a deal of water, you know, almost up to the hatch coaming.
And pretty much full daylight.
Yes,
Because
there was no hangar roof.
Because the hangar roof
I just stood
no
there,
longer
there was absolute shock because the hangar roof had gone. There was water all over the deck. There were people sort of running around, and I thought, you know, this is serious. That's the point. I thought, well, this is really serious.
You know, we're above the waterline, so it couldn't possibly have been seawater coming in from the sea. It come from the system. So that's when I started talking to the incident board operator, John Johnson, about putting some information down on our incident board. It was then that we realised that China graph pencils don't write very well on wet perspex.
A couple of big grumps. And I thought, Christ, we've been hit. I knew it was aft. So I said to the young stoker, we got up, let's run a hose through the bulkhead just in case they've lost anything. So we started running hoses from forward through the bulkheads to the SCC flat.
Because we were still forward, there was all hell sort of broke loose, and I ended up going in the forward sick bay to help out there with any casualties.
Buzz Layton was with me, Florrie Ford, Cliff Sharp, and we went up into the hangar, and it had been obliterated basically. Split open like a tea cake. The helicopter was lying in the starboard netting, still had torpedoes on it. Sorrel was there. And so we didn't need Buzz and Florrie, so we went back down into the SCC flat. And I told them to go back aft and rest. Because carrying a tank on your back weird you out.
And I know the fire party just couldn't get aft. They couldn't get aft of the laundry flat because of the smoke, really. I remember the casualties starting to come into the forward sick bay.
And that's when I met Jeff Curran. He said, "Can you come with me?" And we went down to the after MR, down the ladder, and there was a big 4-foot hole in the deckhead. You didn't need any lights in there because there was no lights working. It was daylight. The diesel was on its side, big green thing lying underneath it.
I went into the switchboard to check the switch. I went behind the switchboard. I was knee deep in water in that place. And I could see this dirty great big hole in the side of the ship. It was about this big. Clearly a bomb had come through there. It had cut, all the cables were dangling into the water.
I think people shifted into another gear, and I think that it was right. How we're going to deal with this? And again, we haven't got much time left before it gets dark, and there will be no more air attacks. So it was trying to survive until then.
Then we started thinking. There was water pouring out of the NAFI door, and so I took my trusty wheel spanner out of my belt, and I walloped the padlock off and opened the door, and instantly this gush of water came straight out of it, and there were Kit Kats and Mars bars and all things floating in the top of it. I remember seeing Scouse Phillips on the door with a field dressing around his head, and MEO Terry Pender shouting, Ken, what's going on? What the fuck's going on? Tell me. And there was all the alarms are going off in this. It was absolute chaos.
And it was at that point we were talking about, just as we led into this, that I had been sent from the ops room
up to
do a visual inspection of what had happened, and on my route back aft, bumped into Jono Johnson and Russ Goebel. Jono had been blown off the Seacat deck. And of course I then grabbed Russ Goebel and said, I'm going aft to do a damage assessment, you're coming with me? And he's like, yep, okay.
And the boss, the MEO, Lieutenant Commander Penderus, who was a stability expert, knew that if it got too much, we were going to flood into the after engine room. So if that had happened, we were definitely going to plunge by the stern if we couldn't counter flood forward.
So down the starboard side, down to the point where we can go up the ladder to the flight deck, not the flight deck, the Seacat deck. And what I was greeted as I got to the ladder was the roof bent over the starboard stews, and just saw this gaping hole into the hangar, and that the Seacat had gone, and looking down into the hangar, seeing actually Bram Sorrel, who was fighting fires, and just this kind of pool of devastation. But I didn't stay because my job was to give a damage report back to the ops room.
There was a sense of a little bit of calm coming into it, and a step up in gear after the first attack. Okay, we've survived that first attack. I think everyone thought, well, that'll be it.
Come back aft, and Knocker was putting some shoring onto the hatch to the stores, down to the stores, and I said, "Everything all right, Knox?" He said, "Yeah, we got it." And I knew he's buzzing because he was bouncing on balls with his feet. He always did that, and he's bouncing. And I said, "You sure you're all right?" He said, "Yeah. Oh, by the way, here, have some nutty." I said, "Where'd you get that from?" He said, "Down there. Loads of it." Anyway, he put the shoring up, and they actually shored it up. Pretty good job as well. And he said, "Yeah, that should last." And that's when they stood down. And we started to walk forward. We just shut the door to the SCC flat. We were dogging it. Going to put 2 dogs on. They went area 1 and red, so we dogged it completely and hit the deck.
I thought, I don't want to kneel down in the water. I don't want to lie down in the water for a start. And so I knelt down in the water, and that was as best as I could do, held onto a stanchion by the after MR, after hatch.
Can you remember who was around you, or were you by yourself?
I was by myself.
And then they came, take cover, take cover, take cover again. So knowing that I had to get out the SEC in case the SEC was hit, I flung myself through the SEC flat bulkhead door, lay flat.
Pedler Palmer was in the forward switchboard, and he wasn't as practiced as Wacker was, so we put the experienced guy into the forward switchboard, our only switchboard left, and Pedler came back to me, and he was just reporting to me when we were told to take cover again, which we did.
I was aware of people going past me from the hangar door direction, heading to the back of the hangar, one of which I believe was Jeff Curran.
I found a couple of lumps of 4x4 timber, and I laid on that because the water, I didn't want to get too wet, at least on the deck. So that's what I did. And I remember coming to some time later. That was, you know, from that point on, I don't know what happened.
I wondered what was going on, and then the next thing I knew was another bang.
Again, tremendous explosions, petrification. I was petrified. I could feel hot metal raining down on my back, and just awful.
Again, I was lifted up in the air, but I was actually sat on top of a torpedo at the time.
Because it seemed an eternity, because we were bouncing up and down on the floor deck, and I think, God, this is taking, Christ, how many times? Trying to count how many hits, you couldn't. Lost. Brain fog.
After the second hit came in, the port side of the flight deck, which had suffered the major damage, was actually bulging. It was lifted up.
And all of a sudden it stopped, and I thought, God, blood. No, I'm all right. Cliff, you all right? Yeah.
And everything that was on the flight deck, the helicopter, and all the people that were out there were basically blown over the side of the ship with that second attack. And it was basically a lonely place. There was only myself there, and I couldn't see anybody else.
So once that was over and the sound was, the sounds had gone, and we'd lost a lot of stuff. There were alarm bells going on in the SEC. So I went back to the SEC only to meet the crew of the SEC coming out, because Terry Penrose had ordered that the SEC be cleared because it was just untenable. I didn't even go and have a look.
And I just carried on. I checked everything was still working. I'd still got all my bits and pieces, and then carried on fighting the fires, particularly in the starboard aft corner of the hangar where the aviation fueling point for the helicopter was. There was a major fire around that, and I thought if that goes up, then it's going to take the back end of the ship out.
So what do we do? Do we go forward, or do we go back aft? And we decided to go back aft. So we opened the door, went through, It was complete darkness.
But fortunately I managed to bring the fires under control, and it was at this point that the first lieutenant came round. I remember seeing him, all a set of white overalls, asking for a sitter at what was going on, and I reported to him the fact that the fires were under control. In fact, most of them are out. There was one that just needed damping down.
As soon as I was told that the fire in the hangar was off, I ordered that they isolate firemen to the hangar so that we could at least get something forward to counterfeit. Subsequently, the Board of Inquiry wondered what sort of an idiot I was for ordering that, but again, they don't understand what was going on.
We're 65 astern and we may have to abandon ship shortly.
And that's when Captain Bob came down in his wisdom, and he said, yeah, you got to get off. I said, what about the people back aft? And he said, no. And that's when Ralphie Coast walked through. And I said, well, he's just walked through. What about the people back aft? He said, no. I said, okay, you do as you're told. That's how it works. So Ralphie all of a sudden said, oh, hi, hurt. That's when Captain Bob grabbed him round the waist and carried him up there.
You couldn't get up onto the upper deck on the port side, so you had to go up the starboard side, up onto the boat deck, and quite surprised to find half the ship's company all there, ready dressed, booted and spurred in one's only suits and life jackets.
Well, I don't remember hearing abandoned ship. After the last attack, let's say, kneeling in the water, I saw the SEC team leave the SEC, so I didn't really know what to do. You know, behind me was on fire. You know, you couldn't see through the hatch; it was pitch black. And then Mick Langley pushed up the after MR hatch. So you know, I knew I had somebody senior there to tell me what to do, basically.
Mick was incredibly important to you around that moment, wasn't he?
Absolutely, yeah. I didn't have to make a decision on my own because I didn't know what to do.
And was that comforting to you?
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
Well, I remember going on the Yarmouth. We ended up down one of the messes where the lads on there took it on themselves to get the cases of beer out and packets of fags. And there was, let's put it this way, there was very welcome.
I was sat down in the main passageway, sort of half slumped, slightly exhausted. I can't remember who I was sat next to when an air raid warning red came over the broadcast. And I seem to remember saying to myself, if we get blown up, I don't really care anymore. I was at the point, I was past caring, I was worn out.
I think it was the dining hall we were all in. And I was freezing. And that's when they said, this guy said to me, you look cold. I said, I'm freezing. He said, want a shower? I said, I'd love one. So that's when he gave me a survival kit and told me to go and have a shower. So I did. Halfway through, area warning red. And I thought to myself, well, I'm not moving from fucking here. You piss off. So I finished with a shower, got dressed. The once only, or the survival kit was from 1945. Size 46 waist trousers. I was a 32. Size 56-inch chest. I was a 48. And size 11 plimsolls, I was a size 8. I looked a clown.
We've got an initial roll call being called by Len, the ship's master at arms. What was your reaction, and maybe the people around you's reaction, when there was no response to some names that you would have had in your mind at the time?
I kind of knew that some people were in the dining hall. The forward Fear Not Superman that I'd sent into the dining hall earlier on in the day when they weren't really, they'd been sent aft from forward. Just go and wait in the dining hall or see Ken Enchicknap and they'll tell you what to do. So I knew that certain people were in the dining hall when on the last attack. So it wasn't until much later on that it really sunk in that, you know, these people weren't found and weren't in the water, weren't in the hospital, that it really became, well, it was a shock, you know, a really, you know, there but for the grace of God go I.
We got alongside the Canberra and we went through the pilot hatch. And we were met with a tot of rum and cigarettes, which I thought was quite nice. So I had a packet of cigarettes, and some of them had 200. I dipped out. I only had 20, but I didn't care.
Rumours started going around that some of the guys that we thought were missing could possibly have already been transferred on board and were in the sick bay. So, you know, hopes were quite high that people that we thought were missing were perhaps already there.
I remember, you know, looking for Knocker as most of the ME department was, you know, thinking about it, you know, he's very close to the senior rates as well, as, you know, he's a much loved character. But we wanted to know who was in the hospital, who had survived, to clarify in our own minds, you know, who was a survivor and who wasn't. The Canberra was a strange melting pot of emotions, I think, you know. You were happy that you were on a ship, and you know, a bigger ship that you could hide in, you know, go to the middle. I mean, that was one of my things on the Ardent, was always keep 2 bulkheads between you and the sea. The Canberra, lots of, you know, the survivor stories, and then lots of other stories started circulating about this and that and people.
And the skipper said, "This is the roll call." And I'm thinking, Christ, there's a lot missing. And I thought, well, I know the names that came, I knew they were all right. I knew they'd been hurt, but they were all right. So I decided to go and see them where they were. And then there was Ken Enchicknap, Ralphie, Scouse, a couple of others. But we were told to go to our cabins. We were given a cabin to go to. And I was with 3 seamen. One was John Goddard, Wolfie Price, and who was the other one? We were just talking, you know, who was missing. Of course, Buzz Layton come up, Florrie Ford, and Wolfie Price was in tears because he'd just got engaged to Buzz Layton's sister. Oh God.
Ken's the only one of my immediate staff who I haven't seen, and we must have lost him. He was down aft, must have gone. And and his wife's expecting a baby. I felt that.
And I remember coming to some time later. I realise now that we'd been attacked again. A bomb had gone off in the galley area and just about wiped out everybody in the section base, apart from me and John Dillon was there, Able Seaman John Dillon, and maybe a couple of other guys. But I couldn't get up from where I was because I was trapped by the back. Someone was digging in my back, like, laying across me. I could see that my hand was damaged. That was bleeding quite badly, and there's a finger missing. Well, it wasn't missing, it was still in the glove. And I thought, oh, well, they can sew that back on again these days. I'll sort that out. I pulled a very large piece of formica out of the top of my head, out of my head. As I came in front of me, there were a pair of legs sticking out of the debris, which were clearly Pedal Palmer. Oh God, give me a moment. Right. He's not moving. There was no way that he was alive, poor chap. As I was thinking what to do, there's movement to my right, and Dylan came up to me and said, "You're all right, Chief, you're all right, Chief." And I said, "Well, get this off my back." The place was full of thick, black, oily smoke. I got him down low, as we're taught to do, and we tried to inch our way forward. We couldn't get past the debris that was there. So the scullery, the whole of the galley. Drinks dispenser there, a nutty machine, wasn't there? Something like that. There was there.
Probably.
Yeah. That wasn't there, and there was a transformer that wasn't there. So all of this equipment had been shoved around the dining halls, and we just couldn't get over it. We then huddled together quite closely, and we said, "Well, I think this might be it." You know, we didn't actually say, but we knew by the feel of it. We were having a lot of difficulty breathing. We huddled together just nearby where he'd actually picked me up, and we tried to move forward. We then got this breath of air, this blast of air that came in from the port side. And at that moment I thought, well, we can do this. We'll move towards the fresh air. As we did, we came close and realised that it was a light, it was a fire. And we were looking straight down in the top of an open tank of aviation fuel.
That was burning.
Burning, yeah. So our only course of action then was to move aft, which we did, and where the after door was in the dining room into the paint shop flat there, and the 182 winch. There was no bulkhead, there was no door. It had all been crumpled up, but the winch was still on its mounting, and there was a clear route underneath the winch. And I said to John, right, let's get underneath the winch, let's crawl out underneath there. He came through after me, we pulled each other up, and we then started to walk essentially on the jagged edge of what was left down aft to the ship's side. We then told him to put his life jacket on. I put mine on as best I could. Trying to do that, I couldn't remember which way you turn the little nozzle. And I couldn't feel it, because you normally do it with this hand, I couldn't feel it. So I'd turn it and blow, nothing happened. I'd turn it and press it, and nothing happens. I just couldn't remember. Eventually I got some air into this life jacket, and not much, and I jumped in the water.
So there is a picture of you and John on the upper deck. Do you remember the lay of the land of the picture, what's actually happening in it at the time it was taken?
Yeah, I could see there's helicopters around, there was a ship coming towards us. I could see a low-level land in front of us. But I wasn't particularly worried about that at the time.
Yes.
All I wanted to do was get air in my
So
life jacket.
when that picture was taken, it's that kind of time that you were doing the air.
Yeah.
And you were both assisting each other,
Yeah,
I guess.
yeah.
What happened next?
Well, we jumped in the water. I was.
Was that a quick decision?
It went like this. The ship's burning behind me. I don't think I've got time to put my survival suit on.
Yeah.
And in any case, I don't think I'm physically able to do that. I know the water's going to be very cold, but there's plenty of things going on around me, and I'll be picked up pretty quickly.
Yeah.
That's my risk assessment.
Yeah.
And I took the gamble and jumped in the water. I think I went pretty quickly into the operating theatre there, and I had my hand operated on with local anaesthetic. I had a tourniquet around the top of my arm. I had a female doctor trying to get a piece of shrapnel out of the top of my arm up here. She couldn't find it. It's still there. The chap removed one finger of the hand and pinned the other finger through the back of the hand, and left the whole of the palm open and packed with gauzy stuff. And that's how I stayed for a few days. Yeah, that's about it. A couple of other things around. Oh, this big gash in my head. Forgot about that.
So next day we get up, and the officers and the warrant officers are called to a meeting with Morgan O'Connell, and to tell us of what the rest of the ship's company are going to be feeling, guilt, etc., 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 and what we must expect of them. And then I heard a rumour, Ken Entingknapp's here, he's on board. What? Weren't allowed to see him, of course, for a couple of days, but then after he'd been operated on and they'd sewn the flapper skin back on his face, there he was in what was now the sort of ward, alongside a bed with an Argentinian boy in it, looking absolutely petrified, and John Dillon was there somewhere as well, and I'm feeling absolutely delighted. And Ken was obviously very groggy, but he still had a sense of humour, because he said to me, he said, "How am I going to tell Frankie?" I said, "Well, tell Frankie what?" He said, "I've lost my wedding ring. My finger's still in it."
About 10:30 at night, there was something just not quite right. You know, when you get these silly feelings, and Steve and I were very close, I have to say that. I mean, it seems such a stupid thing to say. It was almost like a transference of thoughts. And it got stronger and stronger. And it then came on the news to say there was things going on down there, but I think that was later in the night. I can't actually remember. Can't remember time-wise. Anyway, eventually I ended up about midnight ringing up Plymouth. And they were saying, no, there's nothing happening. And of course, this was chewing up and chewing up and chewing up. So I rang every hour through the night till about 6:30 in the morning, when they said, you know, there was nothing had happened. Everything was all right. Eventually, a neighbour came across and you know, I was relating this story and they were saying, oh, come on over, Brendan, have a cup of coffee. So off I toddled across the road and was sitting having a cup of coffee when another neighbour knocked on the door, and Larry opened the door and this chappie says, have you heard? She's been sunk. So I sort of shot up and ran across and I rang Plymouth, and yes, she's been sunk in calm waters and shallow waters and calm conditions, but there's been some loss of life. And that was it. So then I rang Dawn. She was working at Middlesbrough, and I rang the ward and I said, can you send her home, please? Our brother's ship's been sunk and we don't know. But of course I had this feeling. And anyway, she came home in one of the Reliant Robins. And then I had such a job trying to ring the school because it was holidays and the kids were all away. And eventually I got through to somebody and I explained to them and I said, she needs to come home. She's got to come home. But I said, don't play the radio, whatever you do, on the way home, because I need her at home before she gets to know. And I think really Mandy was the most upset because she couldn't believe that it actually happened, that he was dead. So what do you say to, what was she, 11, 12 at the time when it actually happened? What do you say to a child of that age to explain to them, you know? I was standing at the sink and looking out of the window in the kitchen, and I saw this priest coming up with his long grey robe things on. And I looked up and I said, well, we know what this means, don't we? It was just confirmed what I felt, what I'd felt all night. Well, most of the night anyway. And he came into the house, and a poor lad, I was only young, but I felt so sorry for him. He was shaking and he was almost speechless. And I sat him down at the kitchen table on the right-hand side, of the table. And I said, I know what you've come for. Do you want a drink? Yes, please. So we gave him a drink, and he never really officially said, your son's been killed. So officially, he hasn't, he's still there, up there somewhere.
I must pay tribute, public tribute, as certainly the troops would wish us to the crew of Ardent, the frigate that went down, sunk last night.
They had a gun line over the British landing troops. They had to stay in position, or else the troops were totally unprotected.
Ardent was in a totally vulnerable position in the Sound, could not move, did not wish to move.
Without Ardent, they could not have got ashore. Had they got ashore without Ardent, they could not have stayed protected ashore.
So let's just make that tribute very public.
Then we were asked to go and move some stores. And as a ship's company, not as individuals, as a ship's company, we turned up and we moved 73 ton of stores, compost stores, from where it was to the flight deck. And everyone's all right. I mean, because you were working, and all you were doing, going, boom, 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 faster, faster. We got it all out, didn't we?
Yeah.
Because the life of Brian was all about always look on the bright side. And knocker started whistling, then we start singing it, and then it took on through the crew, and it just brought it all back. And you always could look on the bright side of life. He's with our thoughts all the time. I was gutted because him, Whitfield, they were so young. And the Florrie Ford, Buzz Layton, young. Gilbert, young. I was 33. I was old. And I made it. Not good.
A day or two after Steve had been killed, a group of his friends, all about the same age, and Mandy, of course, who was the youngest of them all, we all gathered in cars and went down to a place at the far end of Seaburn where there was some fishermen's cottages, and we got fish and chips, built a fire on the sand, and generally had a hoolie round the fire and talked and laughed over some of the stuff Steve had done. And somebody, I think it was Chris, had actually bought some condoms. I don't think I bought, can't remember. And we blew them up and floated them out to sea for Steve's personal use at sea, in case he came across any mermaids. And I think that was about it. But I can still see those blooming condoms floating out to sea. I mean, honestly, the daft things you think about.
And when we got there, oh, what a beautiful place, really. It's because we went in the bay and the QE2 was there, and we were looking around, saw the whaling station, submarine. I'm thinking, God, yeah. And looking around, then of course we all got in the castle, as Brum said. And we went to the QE2 again. They gave us rum and cigarettes and some clothes.
There was, what I remember, a sea of faces dressed in camouflage gear, lining both sides of the passageway, and they spontaneously started applauding us.
But then we were allocated our messes or cabins, and I was with Buck Taylor. Next door was Mick Newby and yeah, they were, oh dear, they got drunk. That's what Len blew up about, because we all went on the beer, all of us, and there was a young steward on board called Steve from Portland, because me and Knocker took him under his wing when we were down there, and, he's only tiny, and he kicked, oh, come on, Burn, we go down the Pig and Whistle. I said, yeah, all right. Went down there, we were drinking Bacardi and Coke, 50p a smack. And next morning we were all up. Got told to muster. And of course I knocked on the next door's door. I went in, oh my God, it was carnage.
We obviously didn't, or we weren't aware of the ramifications of our actions on the day until much later. I think the general consensus, in my opinion, myself, was the fact that I felt glad that I'd done what I was trying to do. Tinged with sadness the fact that we wouldn't be going back on our ship, which was our home.
Well, I think the main perspective or the main thing that I'm most proud of is that because of our actions that day, that the landings were almost unopposed. Was the sacrifice of the guys worth it? Well, is the sacrifice ever worth it? It was important to go to the Falklands. I think it's important that you don't let aggression, triumph. Unopposed aggression triumph, particularly when it's done for the wrong reasons.
To me, everything was worthwhile. I mean, we suffered a great loss of life there. But was it the whole thing worth it? I'll most definitely say so.
So I was on the Avenger with you.
Yeah.
And we had time away to do other duties, golf patrols and stuff like that. And I know what you mean about straight after the war and how other people saw us. We're aware that if you got sunk, you were slightly looked down upon, which I never reconciled but never fully understood.
There was always this, one-upmanship about being in the Falklands, I think, and yeah, I mean, it was. You almost didn't mention it as you went forward. I know lots of people wouldn't wear the South Atlantic medals because it was, they were embarrassed almost.
It's interesting. I shoved it down the throat of anyone that would listen because I wanted to keep the memories of what we did, but also of our 22 shipmates.
We went down to Plymouth to collect Steve's things that had been stored at Bernie's mum's. And we just happened to go on a bad day when all of the lads were being bussed back into Plymouth. And after sort of having been in the Grant for a while, we all trooped outside to see the buses. And I can remember standing crying and laughing at the same time. I mean, how can you cry and laugh at the same time? But I did.
Met the lads, and because Steve's stuff had been kept at Bernie's, and meeting everybody in the Grand and having a good laugh with everybody as best you can. And Coxie talking about the bun, and I think he was a bit surprised that I knew what the bun was, did the bun on him, and had a little run down Union Street with Coxie chasing me, thinking I'm gonna get my head kicked in, and it kind of, those things made everything a lot lighter, and I think it was that time cemented a lot of very good friendships that have gone on for such a long time.
We ended anyway the night in Boobs, and Bernie would always be somebody special to the White family, that's for sure. And all the lads just coming in and joining in, and it was just a special night, something I'll never forget, and I'm very grateful that they gave me that.
She came down with Dawn and Mandy and the dog and a Reliant Robin. God knows how she made it in that, because it was a bit of a wreck. They came round, they came to Mum's and had a cup of tea. Then we went round Plymouth, and it's lovely. She sounds, Knocker sounds just like her, He's got her mannerisms and everything. He's brilliant. Of course, going to Boobs. Ended up in Boobs. How they got back, I don't know. They must have got a taxi home to the tent. Bless them. But the memorial service, I was gutted. I mean, I'm still am.
The first memories I have of the association starting was the original church service when we got back to HMS Drake. And then it sort of took off from there. I think Lenny and Tony just came up with such a brilliant idea of keeping not only the ship's company together, but the families as well, which was massively important. Like Pete and Renee, I know for a fact, because I love talking to Pete and Renee still, what a massive role it's played in their life. Well, Charlie Ford, Brenda White, it's played a massive part of their life, and that is down to Tony and Len, and in years after that, like Pete Rayleigh and Richie and Buster, who's kept it going. And thanks just cannot be enough on the part they've played in keeping the association together. Luckily, I've been back to the Falklands on 4 occasions. Since I left the Navy, I've been back three times, I think. And as a veteran, as a Falklands veteran, you are treated like a lord in the Falklands. They couldn't be, they couldn't treat you better.
Hooray! Halt!
The fleet enters in 4 groups in this order. Group 1, HMS Ardent, HMS Ardent. 1744, HMS Ardent attacked by 3 waves of Mirage and Dagger aircraft. She was hit 17 times in 22 minutes. 22 men died, including LDM White from Washington. The order is given to abandon ship, and her crew are transferred to HMS Yarmouth.
Photos done for the right now is the TS Ardent, please. To join them. Come on.
Even though I've never actually met him, I kind of feel like I've known him for years anyway. But he's always been like a part of the life without actually being here, which I suppose kind of defines his personality from what I get from obviously all of the stories that you get, because there's plenty of them. My mum's always said, oh, you two would be a nightmare on the drink. So I think she would be a bit worried about us going out on the drink together, but it would have happened. It definitely would have happened. He's always been part of the family sitting at the table without actually physically sitting at the table, although it's been difficult, and it would have been absolutely amazing to be able to meet him and be part of his life. Unfortunately, obviously that didn't happen, but he's still here and we still have laughs about him, so yeah.
She was a Killick Stoker in the Forward Mess. Yeah.
So, just this story here about the Argentine prisoners, I guess, that were in the beds alongside you.
Chap was alongside young Dylan in bed in the, which was the first class ballroom in Canberra.
Yeah.
Rightly. Yeah.
And this story in 1983 by the Daily Mail is just a kind of reuniting by words.
Yes, the thing that they pick up after it's all over.
But what I noticed
there's
is,
no hard feeling between us.
But it talks here about the modest hero in the next bed and about John Dillon, and of course John Dillon and you survived together and left the ship together.
Yeah.
What other names come to your memory today of that time?
Well, I've had a long association with several, but talking about the those that we lost to shipmates, I mean, Stephen Ford, Florrie Ford was in my gulch in a mess. We had quite a relatively close relationship, bearing in mind our age difference was only 3 years, but it's an age difference. We sort of larked about in Narvik and all the rest of it, so he was in my gulch. Andy Barr, I knew from, shall we say, a shared liaison. So there was that. And Gilbert Williams I joined up with, and he'd not long been on board. I can't remember exactly, but only a few months he'd been on board, but a very introverted character. And although he was in training and in Salton, you know, he was a very sensitive guy, so I knew him.
Had he changed much since when you went through training and you teamed up again on the Ardent?
I think it was... Had he changed much? I think he changed somewhat, and I don't know whether it was the fact that we were going down south and that was of more concern. But he was a sensitive guy, more sensitive than I. And when I talk about the Matlow, you know, humour and all the rest of it, where you had Knocker at one extreme, you probably had Gilbert at the other end.
The men throughout that day, which was very frightening, and throughout the period before it, were absolutely splendid. We've got a lot of very young people in our ships, and I was just amazed by how well they performed. They gave me their complete support all the time, and I would love to serve with them again, and I know every captain always says his men are the best. I certainly believe mine were. I'm just devastated that I can't do it.
The ardent roll of honour of our shipmates who died in the South Atlantic. Derek Armstrong, Richard Banfield, Andrew Barr, Peter Bruard, Richard Dunkley, Michael Foote, Stephen Ford, Sean Hanson, Sean Haywood, Stephen Hayes, Simon Lawson, Alistair Layton, Alan Macaulay, Michael Mullen, Brian Murphy, Gary Nelson, Andrew Palmer, John Roberts, John Sefton, Stephen White, Gary Whitford, Gilbert Williams.
I think in all wars, you know, and I you know, across the ages, it's always the youngest, you know, that tend to be, you know, the ones that are lost. But I've always felt that there has to be remembrance and gratitude for them giving up, or that they didn't give up voluntarily, giving up their lives. You know, what could they have done? What could they have achieved? You know, where could they have gone to? And I think that's part of my own personal thing, is to, you know, whatever I managed to achieve or have achieved is partly down to those people.
The diving store was taken out in the first hit. So even though if we'd had the ability to fight some fires, we had no air to do it. There wasn't a portable breathing apparatus, a breathing compressor on board. So we were stuffed. And I don't think that we could have saved Ardent on that day without significant help from other people.
And the main task that day was landings.
In the landing,
and taking other ships away from that primary task was not sensible.
And I'm proud of the fact that all of those guys got ashore without loss.